In the shadowed hills of Transylvania, where morning fog clings to the valleys and the forest whispers with the secrets of centuries, there exists a tale that refuses to fade from memory. It is the story of a bell, no ordinary bell, but one said to toll for those whom the world had long since abandoned. The year is 1830, and the villages that dot the rugged landscape are quiet, their streets empty save for the occasional passerby or wandering livestock. Yet, in the midst of this serene isolation, an enigmatic sound echoes, unsettling in its persistence. A bell, suspended high in a weathered tower, rings not for the living but for the forgotten, those who passed without notice, those whose names were lost to time, whose lives were erased from memory. The villagers speak of it in hushed tones, sometimes admitting to hearing its toll when no hand had moved to strike it. Children, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder, whispered stories of a voice carried on the wind, of metal singing for souls unseen. Elders, stooped with age and the weight of history, claimed to have heard it late at night, reverberating across the hills with a melancholic resonance that seemed almost mournful, as though the bell itself were grieving for the world's indifference. These are not the fanciful exaggerations of a single imagination. Multiple accounts, scattered across letters, diary entries, and oral traditions, hint at something more profound, an intersection between memory, loss, and the inexplicable. From the very first chime, the bell distinguished itself from others. Its tone was said to be unlike any ordinary bell, hauntingly low, with a vibration that lingered far longer than the strike itself. Some described feeling a chill crawl along their spine when the sound reached them, a heaviness settling over the heart, as though the very air around the sound carried the weight of forgotten lives. Others reported that the tolling seemed to follow them, appearing distant one moment and astonishingly near the next, as though it were aware of the listener, attentive to those who might remember what history had chosen to ignore. But what did it mean, this bell that tolled for the invisible dead? Was it merely a monument, a symbolic gesture created by a grieving family or pious village priest to honor lives otherwise unrecorded? Or was there something more, something supernatural, a bridge between the world of the living and those who had slipped through the cracks of time? These questions linger, unresolved, as the bell's legend grows ever darker with each retelling. For in a land already steeped in superstition, tales of restless spirits and echoes of the past are not uncommon, but the bell's story carries a weight that feels distinctly different. It is less a ghost story and more a reminder that even the smallest, most overlooked lives can echo long after the final breath has been taken. The fascination lies not only in the bell itself but in the very idea of memory and oblivion. The forgotten, the sick abandoned to their fate, children left orphaned, the poor who died unclaimed, were never meant to have a voice, and yet here was a bell that demanded their presence be acknowledged. It challenged the living to remember, to listen, and perhaps to feel the sorrow and isolation of lives cut short without recognition. As a viewer, one cannot help but feel a shiver, a strange empathy for these absent figures, their existence commemorated only in sound, in metal, in the eerie persistence of folklore. In many ways, the bell is a mirror. It reflects our own fascination with what has been lost, our need to understand the unexplainable, and our desire to reconcile the darkness of history with the light of remembrance. Even today, centuries after the first toll, its story continues to haunt historians, folklorists, and curious travelers alike. Each account adds a layer of mystery. Some claim the bell only rings at specific times, others insist it is linked to the anniversaries of tragedies long forgotten. No one can agree on the facts, and yet every retelling deepens the bell's legend, embedding it ever more firmly in the shadowed consciousness of Transylvania. As we embark on this journey into the forgotten hills, the abandoned villages, and the echoes of lives lost, we must prepare ourselves to confront the strange, the tragic, and the inexplicable. This is a story where history and folklore intertwine, where a simple object, a bell, becomes a conduit for human memory, grief, and mystery. By the end of our exploration, we may not know all the answers, but we will come to understand why such tales endure, why the forgotten deserve a voice, and why the bell of Transylvania continues to ring in the minds of those willing to listen. It is here, in the mists of 1830 Transylvania, where our story begins, the bell that rang for the forgotten. Its chime is our invitation, a summons to step quietly into the shadows of history, to follow the toll of metal through fog and legend, and to confront the haunting question: who, truly, remembers the forgotten? To understand the story of the forgotten bell, one must first step into the world it emerged from, a Transylvania of 1830, a land suspended between reality and superstition, where the line between the living and the unseen often felt perilously thin. Unlike the romanticized images of rolling hills and grand castles, this was a region of rugged forests, mist-laden valleys, and isolated villages where life was both harsh and precarious. Roads were little more than dirt tracks, and travelers risked illness, injury, and the ever-present fear of getting lost in the dense woodlands. Every hamlet was a microcosm of survival, governed by age-old traditions, superstition, and the rigid hierarchy of rural life. The people of Transylvania lived in a world defined by scarcity and ritual. Crops could fail unexpectedly, winters were merciless, and disease was a constant shadow over the small, clustered communities. Villagers relied heavily on faith and folklore to explain the misfortunes that befell them. Priests and wise women held power in the community, often mediating between practical concerns and spiritual ones, interpreting the natural and supernatural alike. Illness might be blamed on divine punishment or a restless spirit. A sudden death could be seen as a warning to the living. In such an environment, objects like bells were more than mere tools. They were symbols of protection, communication, and, sometimes, reverence for the dead. The forests and mountains of Transylvania were alive with legends. Tales of spirits, spectral wolves, and wandering souls were passed down with an insistence that blurred fact and fiction. Children grew up learning cautionary stories. Do not stray too far into the woods, do not disrespect the dead, and always listen when the bells toll. These stories were not merely entertainment. They were the fabric of survival, teaching the young to respect the forces beyond human comprehension. Within this atmosphere, the notion of a bell that rang for the forgotten seemed not entirely implausible. Rather, it fit seamlessly into a landscape already haunted by memory, superstition, and an almost tangible sense of mystery. Economically, 1830 Transylvania was a region marked by inequality. Large estates dominated the valleys, owned by nobility who often had little regard for the peasants working the land. Most villagers lived in simple, timber-frame houses, subsisting on what they could grow, hunt, or trade locally. The impoverished were particularly vulnerable. Sick individuals, the elderly, orphans, and widows often had no recourse but to rely on the goodwill of neighbors or the charity of the church. Many died alone, their bodies unclaimed, leaving no trace beyond whispered memory. It is within this social void, this forgotten layer of human existence, that the bell's legend takes on its most poignant significance. Its tolling is a reminder that even the marginalized and ignored had a place in the collective consciousness, a symbolic acknowledgement of lives that would otherwise vanish entirely. Religious life was central to Transylvanian villages, yet it was not uniform. Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant communities existed side by side, often interwoven with older, pagan customs that survived despite ecclesiastical pressures. Bells marked daily life, the call to prayer, the beginning of work, or the announcement of death. But in a land where the natural and supernatural were intertwined, a bell could take on a life of its own. It could be seen as a messenger, a warning, or a tribute to souls that had been overlooked. Its sound resonated far beyond mere timekeeping. It carried meaning, emotion, and, occasionally, fear. Isolation amplified these beliefs. Villages were often separated by miles of rugged terrain, connected only by narrow paths that could vanish beneath snow or mud. A bell's chime in such an environment could travel with eerie clarity, its vibrations weaving through forests, over hills, and into the very consciousness of those who heard it. It was as though the landscape itself conspired with the bell to ensure its message was heard, an invisible conduit amplifying the legend before it even left the lips of those recounting it. Yet, not all Transylvanians were steeped in superstition. Scholars, priests, and travelers occasionally brought a more analytical perspective, attempting to rationalize phenomena that others would immediately label as spiritual. Still, even the most skeptical could not ignore the pervasiveness of these local tales or the psychological weight they carried. A bell ringing for the forgotten was more than a sound. It was a narrative thread connecting the living to the dead, society to the outcasts, and history to the present moment. Its presence demanded attention, reflection, and, in many cases, an uneasy reverence. Understanding 1830 Transylvania is, therefore, crucial to understanding the bell itself. The environment, the social hierarchy, the blend of religion and superstition, all converge to form the perfect stage for a phenomenon that straddled the line between history and legend. Here, in this shadowed land, a bell ringing for the forgotten is not merely a quaint story but a deeply human response to isolation, mortality, and memory. It is a symbol of the unseen, the neglected, and the mysterious, resonating across time in a way that speaks to universal fears and curiosities. As we prepare to delve further into the story, we carry with us the echoes of this land, the misty hills, the quiet villages, the ever-present tension between the known and the unknown. Transylvania in 1830 was not just a backdrop, it was a character in itself, shaping the people, the beliefs, and the legend of the forgotten bell. To understand why the bell mattered, and why it continues to haunt our imagination, we must first grasp the world that created it, a land where the boundaries of history, folklore, and human sorrow blurred into something eternal and unforgettable. The story of the forgotten bell begins not with its tolling, but with its creation, a deliberate act that would echo through time, shrouded in mystery and intention. Who commissioned it? Who cast it? And for what reason did someone dedicate resources to a bell that would ring not for the living, but for those erased from society's memory? The answers are fragmented, existing in scraps of church records, scattered folklore, and the occasional mention in a traveler's journal. But even these fragments paint a picture as compelling as it is elusive. Historical accounts suggest that the bell was commissioned by a local priest in a small village tucked away among the Transylvanian hills. The priest, a man known for his quiet devotion and meticulous record-keeping, was deeply affected by the relentless cycles of poverty, disease, and death that surrounded him. Orphan children, the elderly abandoned by distant relatives, and peasants who succumbed to illness without ever seeing the comfort of a priest's final rites, these were the forgotten souls that weighed heavily on his conscience. In a time when the state offered little in the way of social support, it fell upon religious figures to administer not only spiritual guidance but sometimes the barest semblance of care to the destitute. For the priest, the bell became a tangible symbol, a way to honor lives otherwise unrecorded, to ensure that the forgotten were, at least symbolically, remembered. But the bell was no simple church instrument. Records indicate that it was unusually large for the village it served, crafted from a rare alloy whose precise composition has been lost to history. Local smiths and artisans collaborated under the priest's supervision, pouring not only metal but also ritual and intention into its creation. Some accounts describe strange symbols inscribed along its rim, symbols whose meanings are uncertain but which local folklore associates with protection, remembrance, and spiritual guidance. Whether these markings were meant as an invocation or simply as decoration, they contributed to the bell's otherworldly reputation, hinting that it was designed to do more than merely signal time or summon villagers to prayer. There are, however, conflicting accounts. Some historians suggest that the bell may have been commissioned by a wealthy noble rather than the priest, motivated not purely by altruism but by a desire to leave a lasting mark on the land or to atone for past misdeeds. In one version of the tale, the nobleman had been responsible for the suffering of villagers through excessive taxation or harsh enforcement of labor, and the bell was a penitent gesture, a way to honor those whose lives had been indirectly affected by his rule. In another, it is suggested that the bell was intended as a memorial for victims of a recent epidemic, tolling to mark their deaths and provide a measure of solace to surviving family members. Regardless of the patron, the process of creating the bell itself became the stuff of legend. Casting large bells in the early 19th century was a complex and dangerous task, requiring immense skill. Furnaces roared, molten metal was poured into molds, and each mistake could destroy weeks of labor. Local stories tell of nights spent hammering and shaping the bell, of strange sounds echoing from the foundry that some claimed were warnings or omens. Villagers whispered that those who worked on the bell felt a profound weight, as if they were not simply making an object, but giving voice to the dead. Whether this was superstition or psychological tension from working on such a significant project, it added to the growing aura of mystery surrounding the bell. Once cast, the bell was installed in a tower built specifically to house it, a structure modest in comparison to grand European cathedrals, yet imposing within the small village. The placement was deliberate, high above the village, overlooking both the main square and the surrounding fields, ensuring its sound could travel far. It was not just a monument, it was a signal, a voice that could traverse distance and time. Some speculate that the height was chosen to prevent interference by mischievous villagers, while others argue it was symbolic, lifting the voices of the forgotten high into the heavens, closer to the divine. The inscriptions on the bell further deepen its mystery. Though much of the text has worn away over nearly 2 centuries, fragments suggest phrases of remembrance and lamentation, perhaps drawn from scripture, local prayers, or even original compositions by the priest himself. What remains legible reads like a haunting meditation on mortality, isolation, and the duty to remember those society has left behind. Scholars debate whether these inscriptions were meant to guide the bell's spiritual purpose, or merely to add solemnity to an otherwise functional instrument. Either way, they reinforce the perception that this bell was unlike any other, a bridge between the material world and the realm of memory. Yet, even at its inception, questions lingered. Why a bell? Why dedicate such effort and resources to an object that could only act symbolically? For some, it was an attempt to confront death itself, to ensure that those who had no one to speak for them would at least be acknowledged in sound. For others, it was an experiment in ritual, a test of whether an object imbued with intention could influence both the living and the dead. Whatever the truth, the bell's creation was not a casual act. It was deliberate, intentional, and imbued with significance, laying the foundation for a legend that would endure far beyond the lifespan of any single individual. By the time the bell rang for the first time, its reputation was already beginning to form. Villagers reported an immediate difference in its tone, describing a resonance that seemed unusually deep, mournful, almost sentient. Whether this was the natural outcome of the bell's unique design or a psychological response to the collective anticipation of its first toll, it set the stage for the stories and mysteries that would follow. The bell had been born from human intention, yet it would take on a life of its own, becoming a symbol of remembrance, a marker of forgotten lives, and a subject of fascination that centuries later would still capture imaginations. Thus, the origins of the bell are inseparable from the intentions, beliefs, and tragedies of 1830 Transylvania. Its creation reflects the convergence of grief, superstition, and human compassion, producing an object that would resonate far beyond its physical form. The bell was, from its very first toll, more than metal. It was memory made audible, a voice for those who had none, and a mystery that continues to haunt both history and folklore. As the years passed after the bell's creation, it did not remain a mere object of metal and inscription. In the villages surrounding its tower, stories began to form, tales that blurred the line between fact and folklore, history and myth. The bell, they said, had a voice of its own, a consciousness that transcended the human hands which had forged it. It was no longer just a tolling instrument. It became a symbol, a sentinel for the forgotten, and a focal point of superstition that would endure for generations. Local villagers reported hearing the bell at unexpected hours, long after the day's work had ended and the churchyard had fallen silent. Sometimes it would toll at midnight, sometimes just before dawn, and on occasion, the sound would carry across hills and forests so distant that no living person could have rung it. The tolling was often described as sorrowful, carrying a weight far heavier than any ordinary bell could produce. Elders in the village would whisper that the bell rang for the dead who had no one else to remember them: orphans, the sick abandoned by relatives, travelers who had perished in the forest, and victims of unrecorded misfortune. Its chime was a dirge for those who had slipped between the cracks of memory. Stories varied from village to village, each adapting the bell's legend to local experience. In some accounts, children claimed to see shadows lingering near the bell tower at night, as if the tolling had summoned them. Farmers reported strange phenomena: livestock behaving nervously when the bell rang, sudden chills in otherwise warm air, and an uncanny sense of being watched in the fields. Even skeptics could not deny that there was something unusual about the bell sound. Travelers passing through the region recorded tales in journals, describing a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate within the body itself, leaving a lingering unease that could not be attributed to natural acoustics alone. One particularly persistent legend told of the bell ringing for a single individual, someone who had been forgotten in life, perhaps a child lost to famine or a villager who had died alone, and the sound would follow them, invisible yet unmistakable. Those who heard it reported an almost hypnotic sorrow, a feeling that the bell was trying to communicate directly with them, reminding them of the fragility of memory and the weight of unacknowledged lives. Villagers came to see it as a moral instrument, a reminder to honor and remember even those whom society had neglected. In this way, the bell was no longer simply a physical object. It became a vessel for collective conscience, shaping behavior and reinforcing the social contract in a community deeply aware of mortality and neglect. The folklore surrounding the bell also carried darker undertones. Some villagers warned that the bell would toll for the living if their souls were in danger, a spectral warning of impending misfortune. Tales spread of individuals hearing the bell in moments of personal crisis, before an illness struck, before a loved one's death, or before a tragedy that would leave the community reeling. In these stories, the bell seemed almost prophetic, bridging the realms of life and death. Its tolling was no longer just a memory of those forgotten. It was a warning, a messenger that transcended the simple function of marking time. It is important to note that these tales were not uniform or universally accepted. Many considered them mere superstition, explanations devised to give shape to natural phenomena, the wind rustling through trees, echoes carried over valleys, or the distant striking of another bell tower. Yet, the consistency of the reports over decades, combined with the cultural weight of oral tradition, lent them credibility in the eyes of villagers. The bell had, through its unique resonance and the stories attached to it, established a reputation that demanded acknowledgement. To live near it was to live under the influence of history, memory, and the mysterious power of collective belief. Some accounts hint at ritualistic practices forming around the bell. Villagers would leave small offerings at the base of the tower, flowers, coins, or simple prayers, especially for family members who had no known graves. On certain nights, groups would gather silently, listening for the bell's toll, hoping to feel a connection to the forgotten souls it memorialized. Whether or not these practices had a tangible effect is unknown, but they reinforced the bell's symbolic importance, transforming it from a physical object into a focal point for the village's spiritual and emotional life. The bell's presence also influenced local art, music, and storytelling. Ballads emerged describing its mournful toll, and illustrations depicted shadowy figures gathered around its tower in the mist. In each case, the bell became more than a sound. It was a narrative device, a means to explore grief, loss, and the passage of time. Its legend ensured that even as decades passed, the stories of those it rang for would endure. The bell was memory made audible, a testament to human empathy in a landscape otherwise dominated by death, hardship, and neglect. In the end, the folklore surrounding the bell is inseparable from the communities that told these stories. It became a living entity within the collective imagination, an echo of the past that reminded each new generation of the fragility of life and the inevitability of being forgotten. Its power lies not merely in its sound, but in the way it intertwines human emotion with mystery, history with legend, and life with the afterlife. The bell was no longer just an instrument. It was a symbol, a memory, and a moral compass all rolled into one, ensuring that even the most forgotten lives would continue to resonate across time. By the time the next century dawned, the bell had achieved a reputation that extended far beyond the village, becoming a story passed from traveller to traveller, chronicler to chronicler, each adding new layers of mystery, fear, and reverence. The legends of the bell were now inseparable from the identity of the region itself, a sound that carried both sorrow and warning, a relic of human compassion and supernatural speculation, ringing endlessly for those the world had chosen to forget. The bell that rang for the forgotten was no ordinary instrument. Its mere presence was commanding, even from a distance, and it possessed qualities that seemed almost unnatural. Standing high in a tower specially constructed to house it, the bell's silhouette could be seen through the swirling mists of the Transylvanian hills, a dark sentinel over the village below. From the moment of its creation, it was designed to stand apart, both physically and symbolically, marking its importance not merely as a functional object, but as a conduit for remembrance and mystery. Crafted from a rare alloy, the bell's surface gleamed with a muted metallic sheen, a blend of copper and tin that lent it a slightly darker hue than conventional bronze bells. Local records suggest that additional metals may have been mixed in, trace amounts of silver, iron, and perhaps even materials now lost to history, each chosen for their durability, resonance, or symbolic significance. The metal itself was cast in a single pour, a risky and labor-intensive process that would have required skilled craftsmanship to prevent cracks or imperfections. The result was a bell of unusual solidity, one capable of producing a tone that could resonate across valleys for miles, yet with a depth and melancholy rarely heard in ordinary church bells. Its size was equally remarkable. The bell stood well over 6 feet tall, and its diameter spanned nearly half that distance. Its sheer mass was daunting, estimated to weigh several tons, and its placement required not just a sturdy tower, but precise engineering to ensure that its strike could be executed safely. Villagers recalled being struck by the bell's imposing presence even before it was rung, describing a sense of or mixed with unease, as though the object itself carried the weight of the lives it commemorated. One of the most mysterious aspects of the bell was its inscriptions. Etched along its rim in elegant, flowing letters were phrases that have survived only in fragments. Some were clearly prayers, invoking protection and remembrance for those without kin. Others contained symbols that modern scholars have struggled to interpret, geometric patterns, abstract shapes, and what appeared to be cryptic marks resembling alchemical notations. Folklore suggested these inscriptions imbued the bell with power beyond sound, a connection to realms unseen, allowing it to toll not merely for the living or dead in ordinary terms, but for those whom the world had erased from memory. The bell's tone was another defining characteristic. When struck, it produced a deep, haunting resonance that seemed to linger in the air far longer than physics might predict. Villagers describe a vibration that penetrated the body, reaching deep into the chest and stirring emotions that could not be explained by simple sound waves. Some theorized that the unique composition of metals, combined with the bell's massive size, created harmonics that generated these eerie effects. Others, steeped in superstition, insisted the tone carried the very essence of the forgotten, a mournful energy that traveled on the wind to those who would remember. The tower itself was built of sturdy oak and reinforced stone, designed to bear the immense weight of the bell while elevating it above the village to maximize its reach. Its height, coupled with its strategic placement on a hilltop, ensured that the sound traveled unimpeded across the forests, fields, and valleys. The structure had a skeletal, almost cathedral-like quality, with narrow windows that allowed the bell sound to escape in multiple directions. In foggy weather, the tower appeared ethereal, its form half concealed and half revealed, lending an almost ghostly aspect to the bell before it was even heard. Even the clapper, the mechanism that struck the bell, was unusual. Forged from a dense iron core, it produced a tone that was strikingly clear yet unusually resonant. Its shape was deliberately designed to maximize contact with the interior of the bell while minimizing wear, a practical choice with symbolic consequences. Every strike of the clapper sent a precise, mournful note rippling through the landscape, a sound designed to carry memory itself. Local folklore suggested that the clapper had been blessed or consecrated, further embedding the bell within the spiritual life of the community. Over time, natural wear and environmental conditions added to the bell's aura of mystery. Weathering left subtle patterns on its surface, almost like scratches or scars, which villagers interpreted as marks left by the souls it had touched. Rain, snow, and frost only enhanced its resonance, creating moments when the bell seemed to toll without any human intervention. In such instances, villagers whispered of the bell ringing itself, guided by unseen hands, perhaps carrying out its sacred duty to honor the forgotten. The bell's physical characteristics, its size, composition, inscriptions, tone, and placement, made it more than a simple instrument. It was a monument, a testament, and a vessel for memory, grief, and mystery. Every detail, from the alloy in its casting to the cryptic symbols engraved along its rim, reinforced its purpose as a marker of remembrance for lives otherwise lost to history. To hear it toll was not merely to perceive sound, it was to feel a connection to those who had been ignored, abandoned, or forgotten, a reminder of mortality and human empathy intertwined with the supernatural. In this way, the bell became an object of fascination for both locals and travelers alike. It was a source of reverence, a subject of superstition, and a piece of history that could be touched, seen, and heard. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, its tangible nature, it transcended the ordinary, becoming an enduring symbol of remembrance, a mysterious monument to the invisible and the forgotten, whose resonance continues to echo long after its first toll. While the bell's construction and physical presence were remarkable in themselves, it was the stories of its unexplained tolling that truly cemented its reputation. Villagers, travelers, and later chroniclers recounted events that defied ordinary explanation, blurring the lines between reality and the supernatural. These accounts, scattered across diaries, letters, and oral tradition, created an eerie tapestry of mystery that continues to captivate historians and folklore enthusiasts alike. Perhaps the most common reports involve the bell ringing at times when no human hand could have caused it. Villagers claimed to hear the bell tolling late at night, often during storms or fog-heavy evenings, when visibility was nearly zero. In some cases, the sound seemed impossibly close, as if the bell were perched directly beside the listener, yet when they hurried to the tower, no one was there. The tolling would fade into the distance with a haunting cadence, leaving behind a lingering resonance that seemed to vibrate within the listener's chest, an echo that could not be attributed to natural acoustics alone. One account, preserved in a letter from a traveling merchant, describes a foggy autumn night when he was forced to stay in the village due to inclement weather. At midnight, he writes, the bell tolled 3 times, each note unusually low and prolonged, shaking the very air around him. The merchant reported a chill that ran through his body, a sense of overwhelming sorrow that he could not explain. When he ventured outside, he saw no one in the vicinity of the tower, yet the sound persisted, clear and deliberate, for nearly a quarter hour. Upon leaving the village the next morning, he recounted the experience to other travelers, cementing the bell's reputation far beyond the local area. Children, whose imaginations were naturally vivid, offered even more unsettling accounts. Many claimed to have seen shadowy figures near the bell tower at night, figures that seemed to materialize only in the periphery of vision. These shapes were described as thin, elongated, and sometimes indistinct, moving silently across the hills while the bell tolled. In some versions of the story, the figures were said to be the souls for whom the bell rang, appearing briefly to observe the living, perhaps seeking recognition or remembrance. Whether these were true apparitions or the product of imagination, fear, and anticipation, they reinforced the bell's otherworldly aura. Adults, too, were affected by the bell's mysterious tolling. Farmers reported unusual behavior among livestock when the bell sounded at odd hours. Cows refusing to enter the barn, sheep clustering nervously in fields, and dogs howling toward the hills. In one documented instance, a villager described a sudden, unnatural stillness that fell over his home as the bell tolled, an oppressive silence, broken only by the metallic resonance. Such accounts suggest that the bell's influence, whether psychological, environmental, or supernatural, extended beyond human perception and touched the surrounding world in ways that were both subtle and profound. Several witnesses recounted the bell ringing during moments of personal crisis, as though it were attuned to the emotional state of the living. A widow preparing for a funeral claimed to hear the bell toll before dawn, a sound so sorrowful it mirrored her grief. Another villager, recovering from a sudden illness, reported hearing the bell call through the night, a tone that seemed to carry reassurance rather than fear. These experiences lent the bell an almost sentient quality, as if it were aware of those in need, reaching out across space and time to provide a tangible connection between the living and the forgotten. The accounts are not limited to a single village. Neighboring hamlets, sometimes miles apart, reported hearing the same tolling simultaneously. Scholars have attempted to explain this phenomenon in practical terms: wind patterns carrying sound across valleys, acoustic amplification by the surrounding hills, or the unique composition of the bell itself. Yet these explanations fail to account for the specific timing and context of many events. How could a bell toll to coincide with a villager's moment of grief, illness, or crisis if it were merely a product of natural forces? The correlation between personal experience and the bell sound remains a mystery, one that continues to inspire speculation and fascination. Clergy records further complicate the story. Church documents from the period indicate that the bell was occasionally rung by priests during certain ceremonies, but the frequency and timing reported by villagers far exceeded any official usage. Some priests themselves noted strange phenomena, unexplained vibrations in the tower, sudden drops in temperature, and even fleeting shadows seen in the windows of the belfry. These anomalies were recorded with a cautious tone, reflecting both belief and skepticism, suggesting that even the clergy could not fully account for the events surrounding the bell. Beyond the tangible, there are accounts that border on the prophetic. Some villagers claimed that hearing the bell foretold significant events, deaths, misfortunes, or moments of revelation. While these claims are anecdotal and unverified, their persistence in multiple accounts hints at the bell's symbolic power. Whether it served as a psychological anchor, an emblem of collective memory, or something beyond human understanding, the bell had become inseparable from the lived experience of the communities around it. Stories of the bell often involve a mix of awe, fear, and reverence. Villagers would sometimes gather at the base of the tower during certain nights, silently listening for the tolling, as if participating in a ritual of remembrance. Even those who initially doubted its significance were compelled to pause and reflect when the first note sounded, its resonance threading through the hills and forests, touching both the living and, perhaps, the dead. In this sense, the bell functioned as a focal point for human emotion, a vessel that carried grief, memory, and wonder across time and space. These mysterious events and witness accounts transformed the bell from a mere instrument into a living legend. It was no longer just a bell for marking time or announcing ceremonies. It had become a voice for those who could not speak, a conduit for memory, and a symbol of both sorrow and reverence. Its tolling served as a reminder that some lives are too easily forgotten, and that even in isolation, grief and remembrance can find a physical expression, ringing through the hills and into the hearts of all who hear it. The bell of 1830 Transylvania was more than an object. It was a phenomenon. Its story is woven from sound, shadow, and the testimonies of those who lived in its presence, leaving a legacy that is as haunting as it is mysterious. Each toll, each strange occurrence, each witness account adds to a tapestry of human experience and supernatural speculation, ensuring that the forgotten, though unseen, are never entirely silent. The bell of Transylvania did not toll in a vacuum. Its mournful sound echoed across a land scarred by hardship, where death was a constant, uninvited companion. In 1830, Transylvanian villages were isolated and vulnerable, and disease was an ever-present threat. Epidemics of typhus, cholera, and smallpox swept through communities with terrifying swiftness, leaving behind not just grieving families but unmarked graves and forgotten lives. In this context, the bell took on a significance far beyond its physical presence. It became a voice for those who had no one left to mourn them, a tolling for the invisible victims of fate and neglect. The poorest villages often bore the brunt of these epidemics. Orphan children, left without family to care for them, wandered the streets or were placed in rudimentary care houses where survival was uncertain. Elderly individuals, abandoned by distant relatives or unable to work, succumbed quietly to illness or malnutrition. Travelers and wanderers, merchants, shepherds, or refugees, sometimes died in the forests, far from home and unrecorded in any parish ledger. These were the forgotten souls, the unseen casualties of circumstance, whose deaths were unnoticed except by those few willing to bear witness. The bell's tolling was said to honor these lives, functioning as a somber acknowledgement of their existence. Villagers reported hearing it ring at times corresponding to deaths in their community, even when the deceased had no immediate family. It was as if the bell recognized the absence of human remembrance and compensated for it, a metallic voice standing in for grief that had no other outlet. The sorrow carried by its resonance mirrored the unacknowledged despair of the dead, transforming the sound into something both mournful and sacred. Historical records from the region confirm the prevalence of forgotten deaths. Parish ledgers often list the name of an individual, followed by a note indicating the body was unclaimed or buried in a mass grave. Epidemics struck with such force that it was impossible for priests and villagers to provide proper rites for every victim. In one village alone, records show dozens of unmarked burials over the span of a single winter. These anonymous graves became the silent companions to the bell, which, according to legend, told not only for those with names but also for those erased from the pages of history. The psychological and emotional weight of death in these communities was immense. Villagers lived with a constant awareness of mortality, watching friends and family succumb to illness, famine, or accidents. The bell became a coping mechanism of sorts, a ritualistic acknowledgement of lives that could not otherwise be mourned. Its tolling offered a structured rhythm to grief, a reminder that even the forgotten were not entirely lost. In this way, the bell became an intersection of humanity and ritual, merging practical acknowledgement of death with the mystical idea of remembrance transcending mortality. Disease also influenced the perception of the bell as a supernatural object. During epidemics, villagers reported that its tolling grew louder or more insistent, sometimes heard in moments when the plague was spreading most aggressively. Some believed that the bell could guide the souls of the deceased to peace or, in darker interpretations, that it warned the living of impending illness. Whether these accounts were influenced by psychological stress or genuine observation, they reinforced the bell's reputation as a bridge between life and death, a sentinel attuned to suffering and memory. The concept of the forgotten extended beyond physical death. Social neglect, isolation, and poverty meant that many individuals lived their lives at the margins, overlooked by society and abandoned by those who should have cared. The bell's tolling became a symbol of moral responsibility, reminding the living of their duty to remember and honor the most vulnerable. In essence, it was a musical ledger of human compassion, cataloguing the unseen and unheard with a precision that no written record could match. Stories passed down through oral tradition often emphasized the emotional impact of these forgotten lives. Families who had lost children without ceremony recounted how the bell seemed to echo their sorrow, creating a shared experience of mourning across generations. Travelers, too, noted the strange resonance of empathy in the air, an inexplicable heaviness that accompanied the bell's sound, as if the dead were being collectively remembered by an invisible hand. In this sense, the bell became both a witness and participant in the grief of the village, a tangible representation of memory and loss. Even the structure of death in these communities reinforced the bell's purpose. Mass graves and unmarked burial sites dotted the landscape, hidden among forests or near the edges of fields. In such isolation, no marker could speak for the deceased, no grave could convey the depth of life that had once existed. The bell, from its lofty perch, became the surrogate voice for these individuals. Its tolling transformed anonymity into recognition, sorrow into sound, and neglect into ritual. It ensured that, in some small but undeniable way, the forgotten were never truly erased from human consciousness. Thus, the bell's resonance is inseparable from the tragedies it commemorates. It is a sonic monument to mortality, a testament to the vulnerability of life in 19th century Transylvania, and a reminder of society's responsibility to its most marginalized members. Every toll carries the weight of disease, poverty, isolation, and neglect, connecting the living to the dead in a mournful chorus that continues to echo through time. By ringing for the forgotten, the bell transformed tragedy into memory, ensuring that even in the harshest conditions, the souls of those abandoned would endure, not in life, but in sound, story, and legend. While the legends surrounding the bell are steeped in folklore and human emotion, the instrument itself presents a series of scientific enigmas that have puzzled historians, engineers, and acousticians for nearly 2 centuries. Its sound, which so many describe as haunting and persistent, is unlike any ordinary church bell. Attempts to understand the mechanics of its tone, resonance, and far-reaching influence reveal a fascinating intersection of metallurgy, physics, and environmental factors, deepening the mystery while adding a layer of rational intrigue to the legend. The first point of fascination is the bell's unique tonal quality. Most bells, when struck, produce a combination of fundamental notes and harmonic overtones, creating a familiar resonance that can be predicted with reasonable accuracy. This bell, however, was reported to emit tones that lingered unusually long, sometimes reverberating across valleys for minutes rather than seconds. Acoustic experts have noted that its unusual metal composition, an alloy of copper, tin, and possibly trace metals like silver and iron, could create complex overtones that interact in unpredictable ways with the surrounding environment. Yet even modern simulations struggle to fully replicate the bell's reported effect, suggesting that there may be unknown variables influencing its resonance. The size and shape of the bell also contribute to its acoustic anomaly. With a height of over 6 feet and a diameter approaching 3, it is unusually large for a village church, making it capable of producing extremely low frequencies. Low-frequency sound waves, or infrasound, have the peculiar ability to affect human perception. They can induce feelings of unease, anxiety, or sorrow without the listener being consciously aware of the sound. Some researchers speculate that the bell's deep, mournful tone may have produced these effects, explaining the visceral emotional response reported by villagers, travelers, and even the clergy. In other words, the bell may have been physically designed, intentionally or not, to resonate with the deepest parts of human consciousness. Environmental factors further amplify its mysterious qualities. The tower was situated atop a hill, surrounded by valleys and dense forests, creating natural acoustic channels that could carry the bell sound far beyond the village. On foggy or rainy nights, sound behaves differently, reflecting and refracting in ways that make it appear closer or more distant than it truly is. Wind currents can bend and focus sound waves, creating the impression that the tolling is following listeners as they move through the landscape. Even so, these factors alone cannot explain the precise timing reported in multiple accounts, where the bells seem to toll in direct correspondence with moments of crisis or death. The bell's clapper, forged from dense iron, contributes significantly to its unusual tonal characteristics. Its weight and shape were meticulously designed to strike the bell's interior with maximum efficiency, producing a pure, clear note. Yet observers consistently report a secondary vibration, a subtle undertone that seems almost independent of the primary strike. Some acoustic specialists theorize that this may be a form of sympathetic resonance, where the bell vibrates at multiple frequencies simultaneously, creating an ethereal, lingering effect. Villagers, unaware of the physics, interpreted this as the bell speaking, mourning, or even moving of its own accord. Scientific interest in the bell extends beyond sound to its metallurgy. Early records suggest that the casting involved a rare alloy whose exact proportions are now unknown. Modern attempts to recreate the metal mixture have failed to replicate the bell's tonal qualities precisely. Some researchers hypothesize that minute impurities in the original metals, or unique cooling techniques employed by the 19th century artisans, contributed to the bell's resonance in ways that cannot be duplicated with contemporary methods. Others suggest that the bell may have been treated with substances intended to enhance vibration or durability, though documentation of such techniques is scarce. The acoustic phenomena are compounded by the cultural and psychological context. Humans are highly sensitive to sound in ways that are influenced by belief and expectation. Villagers who already regarded the bell as sacred or supernatural were primed to interpret its tolling in extraordinary ways. Reports of chills, shadowy figures, or the perception of the bell following them are consistent with known psychological effects of low-frequency sound, anticipation, and collective suggestion. Yet the consistency and persistence of these experiences across decades, coupled with the bell's rare acoustic profile, suggest that there is something truly unusual, something both material and mystical, at work. Interestingly, even the timing of the bells tolling aligns with certain environmental patterns. Fog, temperature inversion, and wind can enhance the propagation of sound, making a distant toll appear alarmingly close. Scholars note that many of the bell's reported supernatural events occur on nights when atmospheric conditions would naturally exaggerate sound travel. Whether these natural amplifications were known to the bell's creators remains unclear, but their combination with the bell's unique design produced experiences that transcended ordinary perception, embedding the sound deeply into local folklore. Finally, the bell's mysterious acoustic properties extend into the realm of symbolism. Sound, unlike a written record, is ephemeral and immersive. It reaches the listener directly, bypassing intellectual analysis and engaging emotion at a fundamental level. The bell's resonance, combined with its size, placement, and material, ensured that it was not merely heard but felt. This physical impact may explain why it was considered capable of tolling for the forgotten, linking the unseen dead with the living through an audible, tangible experience. In the end, the bell's acoustic and scientific mysteries underscore the intersection of human ingenuity, environmental conditions, and psychological perception. Its resonance is both material and symbolic, real and almost supernatural, echoing across hills and valleys in a manner that has fascinated scientists, historians, and storytellers alike. Whether through physical vibration, low-frequency resonance, or the power of belief, the bell continues to touch those who hear it, proving that even objects of metal and sound can carry profound meaning across centuries. Beyond the scientific and acoustic mysteries of the bell, the most compelling accounts are those that border on the supernatural. For generations, villagers reported sightings, sensations, and experiences that defied logical explanation, lending the bell a presence that went far beyond its physical form. These tales, preserved in diaries, letters, and oral tradition, contribute to a sense that the bell was not merely a commemorative object, but a living entity, interacting with the world in ways that humans could feel but not fully understand. One of the most persistent reports involved apparitions near the bell tower. Witnesses described shadowy figures appearing at the edge of vision, often only during the tolling of the bell. These figures were rarely distinct. Some were fleeting silhouettes, others appeared more human-like, moving slowly across the landscape. Villagers consistently reported that the apparitions were neither threatening nor malevolent. Instead, they were mournful, seemingly drawn to the bell's resonance as if it summoned them from beyond the veil. In local folklore, these figures were interpreted as the souls for whom the bell tolled, the forgotten and unremembered, given form for a brief moment by the sound of remembrance. One widely cited account comes from a young shepherd who claimed to have been tending his flock near the tower at dusk. He reported hearing the bell toll unexpectedly, its resonance deeper and more sorrowful than ever before. As the sound rolled through the valley, he saw faint figures gathering near the tower, almost transparent and flickering with the movement of the mist. The shepherd later described an overwhelming sense of grief that seemed to envelop him, as if he were absorbing the sorrows of countless unseen lives. He ran to the village, pale and shaken, and his story became one of the earliest recorded testimonies of the bell's supernatural influence. The bell was also associated with physical sensations that defied conventional explanation. Multiple accounts described chills, sudden drops in temperature, and an almost electric sensation in the air during its tolling. Some villagers claimed that even indoors, they could feel the vibrations deep in their bones, as if the bell's resonance extended beyond mere sound waves into something far more tangible. Travelers unfamiliar with the bell often reported the same effects, suggesting that these phenomena were not entirely psychological, but rather a combination of environmental, acoustic, and perhaps unknown forces. In addition to apparitions and physical sensations, there were reports of unexplained auditory phenomena. Villagers sometimes described hearing voices or murmurs interwoven with the bell's tolling, words that could not be deciphered but conveyed emotion, grief, longing, or remembrance. Some accounts suggest these voices belonged to the souls for whom the bell rang, a spectral chorus rising in harmony with the bell's mournful sound. Though skeptics dismiss these reports as imagination or heightened sensitivity during moments of emotional vulnerability, the consistency and frequency of such claims over decades give them a weight difficult to ignore. Certain nights, particularly those shrouded in fog or mist, were said to be charged with the bell's presence. On these evenings, villagers reported seeing not only shadows near the tower but also fleeting glimpses of figures walking across the hills, as if drawn to the sound. Animals, too, appeared to respond unusually. Dogs howled toward the mist, livestock remained unusually still, and birds fell silent in the trees. In folklore, these phenomena were interpreted as signs that the bell had activated a liminal space, a threshold where the living and the dead briefly intersected, allowing the forgotten souls to manifest in the physical world. One of the most chilling aspects of these accounts is the apparent intentionality of the bell. Witnesses reported that the tolling sometimes appeared to respond to events in the village, an impending death, a sudden illness, or a moment of personal grief. While some explanations suggest that the timing was coincidental, Others argue that these experiences contributed to the bell's aura as a supernatural instrument, capable of perceiving humans suffering and responding in a way that transcended natural law. The bell was also said to influence dreams. Villagers reported hearing its tolling in sleep, often accompanied by vivid visions of the souls for whom it rang. Some described dreams in which they wandered through misty valleys, following faint lights or shadowy figures to unknown destinations, only to awaken with the sound of the bell echoing in their ears. These experiences reinforced the idea that the bell was not only audible in the waking world but also reached into the subconscious, touching the deepest layers of human memory and emotion. Even skeptics, upon spending time near the tower, often reported feelings of unease, melancholy, or reverence that they could not explain. Some historians and scientists visiting the site noted an inexplicable heaviness in the air, a sensation of being observed, or a subtle vibration in the ground that coincided with the bell's tolling. While modern technology has yet to provide definitive explanations for these phenomena, the accounts demonstrate a pattern of experiences that cannot be fully dismissed as mere superstition. The bell's supernatural reputation is inseparable from the lives it commemorated. Its tolling became a ritual in itself, a call to remember, to witness, and to acknowledge those whom society had neglected. By bridging the gap between the living and the dead, between folklore and reality, the bell created a space where grief, memory, and mystery intersected. Its spectral manifestations and haunting resonance ensured that even centuries later, its legend would endure, compelling historians, scientists, and storytellers alike to confront the boundary between the natural and the supernatural. Ultimately, the supernatural encounters surrounding the bell are part of what gives it such enduring power. They are stories of grief made audible, of memory made visible, and of a small village in 1830s Transylvania where the line between the living and the forgotten became, for a fleeting moment, impossibly thin. Whether through shadow, sound, or sensation, the bell continues to remind us that some voices, though overlooked in life, may find a way to be heard after death, resonating through time with an eerie and unforgettable clarity. As decades turned into centuries, the bell that had once resonated across the hills of Transylvania gradually fell into obscurity. Changing times, shifting populations, and the inexorable march of history left the bell increasingly forgotten, ironically echoing the very theme it had been created to honor. The villages around it experienced depopulation, political upheaval, and modernization, all of which contributed to the neglect of a structure that had once been the moral and spiritual heart of the community. By the late 19th century, accounts of the bell's mysterious tolling had become sporadic. New generations, less attuned to the oral traditions and folklore that once gave the bell its aura, often regarded it as an antiquated relic. The tower itself began to deteriorate under the weight of centuries of weather, and the metal of the bell, though remarkably durable, started to bear the subtle marks of corrosion. Local priests, tasked with numerous other responsibilities in rapidly changing times, were less inclined to maintain the structure or ring the bell in memory of the forgotten. It seemed that the bell itself had become a casualty of the very forces of human forgetfulness it was designed to counteract. Yet even in neglect, the bell retained an aura of power. Travelers and occasional historians who ventured into the region reported hearing faint tolls in the distance, often at times when no living person could have rung it. Some suggested that the wind, the shape of the tower, or thermal effects could explain these anomalies, but local villagers whispered that the bell's purpose persisted regardless of human attention. Its sound, they claimed, continued to honor the forgotten and the abandoned, a testament to the enduring nature of memory beyond the limits of social care. Modern rediscovery of the bell began in the early 20th century when historians and folklorists started documenting Transylvania's rural heritage. In journals, letters, and early ethnographic studies, the bell appeared as both a historical curiosity and a cultural enigma. Scholars noted its unique physical properties, the rare alloy from which it had been cast, and the surviving inscriptions along its rim. Even after nearly a century of neglect, the bell's tone, when struck, reportedly retained an unusual depth and resonance, captivating those who heard it. These rediscoveries reignited interest in the bell, not just as a historical artifact, but as a symbol of the intangible, bridging folklore, memory, and science. The 20th century also brought new interpretations. Some saw the bell as a metaphor for the consequences of social neglect, the forgotten souls it told for now mirroring broader societal indifference to poverty, disease, and isolation. Anthropologists and historians studied the surrounding villages, comparing oral traditions, parish records, and physical observations, attempting to separate legend from historical reality. Their research revealed the intricate interplay of community memory, cultural transmission, and physical phenomena, highlighting how an object of metal could carry centuries of emotional and social significance. Interestingly, even in modern times, locals continued to report strange occurrences linked to the bell. Foggy nights, sudden chills, and distant tolling persisted, suggesting that the bell's influence was not merely a product of 19th century superstition. Some accounts describe hikers or travelers hearing the bell in uninhabited regions, its mournful resonance evoking a sense of grief and remembrance despite the absence of a nearby village. In this way, the bell transcended both time and place, leaving a haunting imprint that reached beyond the immediate community for which it was originally intended. The inscriptions, though partially eroded, have been the subject of renewed scrutiny. Historians and epigraphers have attempted to document and interpret the remaining symbols and prayers, piecing together fragments of the original message. While some inscriptions are clearly devotional in nature, others remain mysterious, hinting at forgotten rituals or spiritual practices designed to empower the bell's memory-tolling function. The uncertainty surrounding these symbols adds to the bell's enigmatic aura, reinforcing its status as an object both historical and otherworldly. Modern preservation efforts have sought to protect the bell and its tower from further decay. Though restoration has been cautious, designed to maintain historical authenticity, there is recognition that the bell is more than an artifact. It is a cultural and emotional touchstone. Museums, historians, and local communities now approach it with reverence, honoring the intentions behind its creation while attempting to preserve the stories and experiences that have accumulated over nearly 2 centuries. In doing so, they continue the bell's original purpose, to ensure that the forgotten, though erased from official records or daily memory, are still acknowledged and remembered. The rediscovery also sparked renewed public fascination. Writers, filmmakers, and storytellers have incorporated the bell into literature, documentaries, and historical narratives, each retelling layering additional mystery, melancholy, and supernatural suggestion. While some accounts emphasize the folklore and eerie encounters, others highlight the bell's scientific peculiarities and acoustic marvels, creating a multifaceted story that appeals to both rational inquiry and the human desire for the uncanny. Ultimately, the bell's decline and rediscovery illustrate the paradox of memory. It is a physical object vulnerable to time and decay, yet its impact endures through stories, sound, and cultural consciousness. The forgotten souls it tolls for, and the people who continue to listen and interpret its sound, demonstrate the resilience of remembrance and the power of objects to embody history, grief, and mystery. Even today, in a world vastly different from 1830, the bell stands as a monument not only to the past but to the ongoing human need to honor lives otherwise overlooked, echoing a message that resonates across centuries, that no life, however forgotten, need ever be entirely silent. The Bell of Transylvania, having survived centuries of neglect, supernatural rumor, and historical obscurity, has left an indelible mark on culture, folklore, and the collective imagination. Its influence extends beyond the villages where it once tolled, inspiring stories, literature, music, and scholarly discourse that explore the intersection of memory, loss, and the uncanny. In this way, the bell has become more than a historical artifact. It is a symbol of human empathy and the enduring fascination with the unseen and forgotten. Folklore surrounding the bell has persisted through oral tradition, passed from generation to generation. Tales of ghostly apparitions, mysterious tolling, and unexplained vibrations have been recounted in hushed tones by villagers and travelers alike. These narratives emphasize the moral dimension of the bell. It tolls not merely for the dead, but for those who have been neglected, abandoned, or forgotten by society. In this sense, the bell functions as both a reminder and a lesson, encouraging listeners to honor lives that might otherwise fade into obscurity. This oral tradition has allowed the bell's legend to survive even as the original communities that built and maintained it have transformed or disappeared. The bell's cultural reach extends into literature as well. Writers fascinated by macabre history and mysterious phenomena have used it as a narrative device, crafting stories that explore grief, memory, and the supernatural. In novels and short stories inspired by the bell, it often serves as a bridge between the living and the dead, a sentinel that speaks for those who cannot speak for themselves. In these narratives, the bell's tolling becomes a character in its own right, an omnipresent force that shapes the emotional landscape and moral universe of the story. By embedding the bell within fiction, authors preserve its resonance in both literal and symbolic terms, allowing contemporary audiences to experience its melancholic and haunting presence. Music and composition have also drawn inspiration from the bell. Composers in the region and beyond have created works intended to capture its mournful tone, seeking to evoke the same physical and emotional resonance reported by witnesses. In some pieces, Low-frequency instruments and unconventional harmonics mimic the bell's deep tolling, recreating the sensation of vibration within the listener's body. In others, recordings of resonant metal objects have been layered with ambient sounds to replicate the eerie experience of being near the bell. These artistic interpretations preserve the bell's emotional impact, translating centuries-old legends into a sensory experience that continues to touch modern audiences. Historians and folklorists have devoted extensive research to the bell, examining it from both technical and cultural perspectives. The surviving inscriptions have been analyzed for religious, alchemical, and symbolic significance, while the bell's physical composition and acoustic properties are studied as examples of advanced 19th-century metallurgy and sound engineering. Through these studies, scholars have highlighted the bell as a rare intersection of tangible history, scientific curiosity, and supernatural folklore. It embodies a rare convergence where human craftsmanship, environmental influence, and cultural memory create an enduring mystery. The bell's influence is also evident in tourism and regional identity. Visitors to Transylvania are often drawn to the sites associated with the bell, eager to experience firsthand the history, landscape, and stories that surround it. Local guides recount legends with the same reverence and dramatic tension as the original villagers, preserving the oral tradition while adding layers of interpretation. Even in modern times, the bell's tolling, or the memory of it, serves as a focal point for reflection on mortality, empathy, and the passage of time. The connection between the bell, the land, and the people who hear its story creates a cultural resonance that endures across generations and borders. In contemporary storytelling, the bell has become emblematic of the broader theme of remembrance. Documentaries, podcasts, and digital media explore its history, the mysterious phenomena it inspired, and its symbolic significance. The bell represents a timeless meditation on who society chooses to remember and who it allows to be forgotten. Its narrative encourages audiences to consider the invisible lives in their own communities, transforming a physical object into a moral and emotional touchstone. The bell's cultural legacy also extends to the study of collective memory. Anthropologists note that objects like this bell serve as anchors for community identity, providing a focal point for shared experience and moral reflection. In the case of the Transylvanian bell, its resonance, both literal and metaphorical, ensures that the forgotten are remembered, that grief has a channel, and that the passage of time does not erase human connection. This reinforces the bell's dual role as both a historical artifact and a living symbol, demonstrating how material objects can embody intangible values and sustain them across centuries. Even in modern fiction and media inspired by Transylvania's dark history, the bell often appears as a motif symbolizing the thin line between life and death, memory and oblivion, reality and the supernatural. It is invoked as a reminder that some histories are hidden, some grief unspoken, and that objects can carry the weight of human experience in ways that surpass the written record. The bell's tolling becomes a metaphor for vigilance, empathy, and the enduring power of remembrance, resonating with audiences who are drawn to the mysterious, the macabre, and the morally profound. Ultimately, the bell's cultural legacy is inseparable from its origins. Its creation in 1830, its tolling for the forgotten, and the mysteries surrounding its sound and inscriptions have given it a life far beyond the tower itself. It endures as a symbol, a moral compass, and a source of wonder, inviting listeners, readers, and viewers to confront both the fragility of life and the resilience of memory. Through literature, music, folklore, and scholarly study, the bell continues to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, ensuring that the forgotten remain present in our collective consciousness. In this way, the bell is more than history. It is a living story, a reminder of humanity's capacity for both neglect and remembrance, and a testament to the ways in which culture preserves memory long after the hands that built it have vanished. It reminds us that even the most forgotten lives can echo across centuries, resonating in sound, story, and the human heart.